I used to be a fitness instructor where I taught spinning classes for many, many, many years.
So you're one of those guys that turns people's legs into jelly.
Yes, it was something that I definitely took pride in, which was that people who were extremely into cycling would take my class and feel the pain, even though I'm not really a cyclist.
Welcome to Threat Vector, the Palo Alto Networks podcast. I'm your host, David Moulton, Director of Thought Leadership. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Jamie Fitzgerald from Okta. At Okta, Jamie focuses on access management, devices, and security and risk. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the evolution of identity security and its role as the new perimeter in today's hybrid work environment, the importance of strong identity controls, including multifactor authentication, passwordless authentication, and other advanced security measures, how identity is the foundation of a zero-trust security strategy, and the emerging trends and technologies that will shape the future of identity security. Here's our conversation. Jamie, thanks for coming on Threat Vector today. I know we're going to get into the conversation around identity, but I wanted to start by asking you about your career. Take us through that journey.
Yeah, it's a pretty lucky journey, I guess I'll call it, that started off with software engineering. And I kind of worked my way into that world. And I was working in a defense contractor, and I had kind of grown my career there and had a team and all that good stuff. But this is really a story of network, not networking, which is going to come later, but it was about my network. And I had a good friend who I had gone to undergrad with and had gone off to business school. And he ended up at some tiny little cybersecurity startup that he had asked me to check out with him. It was this thing called Palo Alto Networks, ironically. And I quickly said, absolutely not. I'm doing so great in my defense contractor software engineering career. And then I kind of got bored, and he was in Silicon Valley and he was doing this thing, and we stayed in touch. And it was about that time that I gave him a call and said, hey, you still at that startup? How's it doing? And he said, I am at that startup. It's going really well, and you should come. And next thing you know, I moved to the Bay and started this new crazy career in cybersecurity. And really, I started off by kind of owning the way that you manage Palo Alto Networks next generation firewalls. And then my career really kind of it was the incredible growth of Palo Alto Networks allowed me to have multiple careers within Palo Alto Networks. In which I owned the threat prevention, IPS subscription, app ID, device ID, decryption, many different aspects of the Palo Alto Networks next gen firewall platform. And then I owned identity at Palo Alto Networks, and it became really interesting to me. I started to see different threat vectors that I had not seen. I had been at Palo for almost 11 years, and it was time for me to see something else and see what's out there. And therefore, I got an opportunity to go to Okta and take on Okta Verify, the way you actually authenticate for most people. And I always loved it. I thought it was a really easy, smooth, user-friendly experience, even though we were purposely adding friction to an off story. And as we're going to probably talk about later, identity is going to become more and more important in the security landscape.
Yeah, so Jamie, you said something, and I think it's an underappreciated opportunity when you can move around your career within the same company. I want you to talk about that a little bit and how cross-pollination can reinvigorate your passion and your interest.
Totally. You look backwards and you kind of see this path, but when you're in the moment, you don't necessarily know where it's going. And I think that my TLDR is, be great at what you do and be curious to learn about other areas and let people kind of see that, you can execute, you can learn, you can talk about their product. You can try to find ways to integrate, because then people say, hey, there is a new opportunity here. There's a new opportunity there. And next thing you know, I was able to kind of expand from, like I said, management into centralized management. And then we really wanted to get into this concept of analytics. I was kind of like the next major step. And we
Yeah.
had introduced and created this new data lake thing. And but the concept was really taking a bit of a chance, but it's the lowest risk chance you can take, being inside the same company with a great reputation, ideally, for you to kind of say what's new,
Right.
how can I add value, and how can I, kind of drive the next step of where this company can go. And I highly encourage it to anybody that is, thinking career moves.
I remember years ago, I called it my year of yes, this is probably 6, 7 years ago. And the idea was that no matter the opportunity that came up, I had a bias towards saying yes. It was exhausting at the time, but it was also an incredible payoff. My network grew, my skills grew. I found myself doing things I had no business doing, but with people who are willing to pitch in, to teach me, to help me out. And that led to a lot of new opportunities. That led to a reputation as someone who was willing to try. And once you've tried a bunch of different things, you can make connections that others don't readily see. And I think that that leads to innovation, to fresh perspectives. I think you and I are both able to look back and see the path or the patterns, but when you're doing it, it isn't always clear. What is clear is going in with a mindset that says, yes, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to invent the future. And especially at a place like Palo Alto or a technology company where a lot of the answers are unclear, a willingness to ignore the ambiguous and to try is it's the right attitude. It's the right approach.
Totally.
In today's cybersecurity landscape, why is it that identity is considered the new perimeter?
Yeah. I think that it's, again, in my mind, having to do with the world that we live in today, the modern workforce, the hybrid reality of life, which is, you know, historical brick and mortar, the traditional perimeter has been evolving. I think, as I'll kind of say this, that identity is the one door. It is the one place where you can ensure you have some security control no matter what. Now, it becomes tricky in a modern environment where you have BYOD. So, what security controls do you have there? Well, you might have contractors and business partners. And in that world, you may or may not have security controls. You might have to trust someone else to have security controls. I think when you just look at that and you look at that landscape, you start to ask, what controls do I have all the time? Well, ideally, you have identity as part of your core strategy to protect your most important resources all the time in every deployment, no matter how you run your organization or how you have to run your organization, frankly. If you're a security practitioner, sometimes you would love to do something more, but you feel like you can't, or there's business need to do something else. And so I find it really important to think about the identity as the perimeter, because it is unanimously and ubiquitously deployed. There is no other way in, ideally, to access resources than through your identity deployment. Whereas you may not have your endpoint or your network or all the other things that you'd like to have in place in every one of those aspects. So I think that it becomes the new perimeter. Now, I'm not suggesting you should not have a defense in depth strategy. You should absolutely have a defense in depth strategy. I'm just saying that identity should be at the core of it, because there should be no use case where you don't at least enforce secure auth, the best practices that you can lay there, and put in your best foot forward when it comes to accessing resources, even in an environment where you don't have the rest of your security stack in place for whatever reason.
I've got to figure that there were some real pivotal moments or influences that shaped your perspective on cybersecurity. Could you talk about one or two of those?
Where do I start? I'll give you one example of one that I thought was fun. I had a friend who we used to work together at this defense contractor, and he was always interested in cybersecurity, and he was like one of the sharpest guys. Again, part of your network, the guy that you kind of look at and go, "Wow, that guy's going to do great things." And he was the guy who also would do things that you're like, I'm not going to do. Like he downloaded the U.S. Department of Defense's report on China's cyber usage. This was back in like 2009 or 10. And uh, somehow, I'm guessing there was some type of malicious software that was embedded into this link that he clicked. And next thing you know, he went off to some vacation, came back home. And again, we worked at a defense contractor. So he walked up to his desk and his computer was gone. And he was like, what is going on here? Because both of us happened to be in grad school at the same time. And he was working on his master's thesis. And the only copy of it was on that machine because we weren't like cloud, and the world has evolved a lot since that time. And so it turned out that lo and behold, there was some type of backdoor that was installed probably when he downloaded this thing to read. And they discovered it and took his laptop away. And he had to get senior vice president approval to just get his thesis off of this machine. And that was the day that like I was like, oh, this is real. Like this is not just something that people talk about. It's not just on the news. Like this is the new frontier, as
Right.
we're sitting in a defense contractor realizing that actual espionage is taking place.
This isn't
It
an
was
academic exercise.
it's not academic. Exactly. And I think, not everyone gets to have like that, like hands on. It's literally right next to you. You're like feeling it. And this man, like, panicking his life, his whole education career is sitting on this thing. So the good news is he ended up getting his thesis back and he got his master's, and he actually is in cybersecurity and as a superstar VP and all that. But it turned out that that was that was one of those pivotal moments that I started. It actually got my eye on this, and it wasn't the moment that I decided to move and change my career, but it was one of the key moments for me to realize that this is something that the world is going to know a lot about here. If you didn't really know it yet.
I think that experience, that willingness to observe what's going on around you, maybe you didn't feel it personally, but you certainly saw it up close and personal, is absolutely influential. And a lot of us have had that moment. I go back to our GM at my previous career at IBM, and he made a comment that really resonated with me. He told a story about the first piece of mail that your baby gets, and that it's this letter that says that their identity has been compromised due to a breach at a healthcare provider or an insurer. And you have this cute little baby child, and you've got this form letter, and you're looking at the two, and you see that you need to protect their identity. And you realize these two things should never have to go together. And that really resonated with me at that point in my life as a dad, and I've never forgotten it. It's been one of those things that says, how do I push back against these things being reality? And I think as we get into this conversation around identity, I look at it, and I'd ask you to school me on this, but to me, identity is a proxy for trust. If I don't know who you are, I can't let you in. If you don't know who I am, why would you give me access? Why would you give me information? Why would you let me into your systems? That is the new perimeter, and maybe that's the thing we should talk about. What are some of the concerning threat vectors that you've been observing recently, and how are those evolving?
So I guess first I want to comment on. I think it's an amazing story and terrifying in one way, and I just about the hospital and the child because I know that feeling and it's real. So I just want to kind of comment and act that. I think we see all these attacks that are taking place, and the role that we have in this industry is actually helping make sure that those emails aren't coming. And So I take that really seriously. So I wanted to connect to that because I think it's a really important role in the world. So I hope that everyone who's listening to this kind of takes some pride and to know that you're doing really important work. So there's that. I think as we talk about identity and the threats that we have, I do think that when you talk about it is about trust, it is all about trust. And I think that it's interesting how there's a lot of good analogies between the physical world and identity on the internet and in corporate networks. And really, what it comes down to is, I don't know who you are, David, until we got a chance to meet, until I got introduced, until I either trusted someone else to introduce me to you, or you provided identification of some sort to prove that you are who you are. And, a lot of those kind of systems that we've had in place in our everyday life, we've tried to make analogies or similar systems in the corporate world, and so um, I think that we've done good jobs in some cases, not so good jobs in other cases. We'll probably cover some of that as we walk through, but I think if you talk about the threats that are taking place and like the evolution of it, I would say a couple different things. Number one, I think that the world changed. And when the world changes, adversaries adjust. And what I mean by that is we work from home more than ever. COVID fast forward that more than ever. Like people have workforces that are not within a brick and mortar, HQ or the normal perimeter stack. I mean, these things have been happening, but then like the firestorm of COVID and everybody working from everywhere, again, because of this cataclysmic change in our lifestyles in every single organization, from state and local governments having to suddenly support remote work, which they never even thought of before, it became a really interesting challenge because adversaries knew that they had the weakest link isolated, like a predator seeing the thing that they want in an isolation, which means that they're at home. And what is their security stack? What does it look like? And it became that identity became the most attacked vector because it became easier theoretically to do a credential attack and log in from anywhere because anywhere was acceptable all of a sudden. Working from anywhere made it such that I can't just shut down access to a particular resource or app to say you must come from HQ or an office building. And so if I could simply steal credentials or act as if I am David or Jamie, then I suddenly had access to whatever I wanted with the least amount of friction. And it's very difficult to trace historically. And so that is the landscape that led to the
Right.
rise in phishing attacks that we have seen, like unbelievable amounts of growth.
Is
Then
there
the
a
rise of social engineering. Please.
No, I was going to ask if there's a particular case study or an industry event that is really an exemplar of what you are talking about.
I think there's many. I would say we found an anecdote I've shown to a couple different executives, and I think it's just um, explanatory of like what's happening. It was about, and we're going to talk more about this, I think, later as well, which is phishing and MFA, and just thinking that like historically we thought we were fine in the beginning with just a strong password. That was okay. And then in about 2019, there was a study that came out that said getting to MFA would stop like 99% of phishing, full stop, like done. And we fast forward to today, and like my entire talk track is passwords are dead, and traditional MFA, which is push or SMS, are completely insufficient because adversaries know how to bypass all of those. So it's funny that literally within less than 5 years, what we used to say was 99.9% acceptable is no longer even thought of as um, a plausible answer to what's happening in our world. And I could try to I'll find that quote at some point if we have a chance offline.
Yeah, if you've got access to that, we'll include it in the show notes as an artifact of a different era. I mean, it's only a few years ago, but in tech and in security, like you mentioned, multi-factor authentication, it was often touted as the critical defense, but you've also said that it's no longer seen as something that is going to give us that 99.9% of ability to stop phishing dead in its tracks. How effective is the practice now? What challenges do organizations face in implementing it? Talk a little bit more about MFA for me.
Yeah, no doubt. So MFA, as in multi-factor auth, is it still is a critical line of defense. And so I don't want to suggest that doing MFA is not important. It is important. I think what my ask is for folks to look at the quality, or call it the trust level or assurance level, based on what type of MFA you use. So uh, what this comes down to is, historically, rolling out MFA into an organization alone was seen as a high task, because you have to go roll out some type of factor, or you have to have a phone, or you have to have a push mechanism, which means you have to have an app on a phone. Some folks have gone with these, hardware tokens, where you're having to carry around these, like, a key of some sort, or even the rotating number. Historically, we've seen all of these. And I think the friction of rolling out any of those things, dealing with lost devices, how do I manage a large fleet? How do I actually deploy it in front of all of my apps, including legacy applications where modern auth may not be baked in, have all been real challenges for folks to get there. So I think, again, it's still a worthy cause to get there, because not everyone even uses MFA today. But the message I want folks to understand is that there are new opportunities that have been brought to us by modern technology that you can really lean into. And it's how you use your phone. It's how you use your laptop today, which is the face IDs, the touch IDs, the biometrics that we're used to every day. We use in our banking. We use to unlock our devices. And that consumer experience that folks have gotten used to, what you don't realize is actually really interesting. Just doing a face ID or touch ID is actually multi-factor auth. People are like, what do you mean? I'm just doing this one thing. Well, the way that it works is that the only way to leverage the biometrics that you registered on these devices, or even a PIN code, means that I know that it is your device that you are in possession of. That is called a possession factor. That is, we know what you have. We trust it. It's been registered with us in some way, shape, or form. Also, when you go to authenticate with your biometrics, you now can assure that it is you in a passwordless way, which means that in this case, there is no way to remote convince you to biometrically log into this particular device, which means now we have high trust of who you are. We know what you have and who you are. Just that alone is a multi-factor auth. Now, what's cool is that we can now do even more things behind the scenes. We can gather more information about that device. We can ensure the device is in a good, state when you go to authenticate. There's so many more things that we've done, but if you just take it from a pure MFA perspective, I think the exciting part that we have in the industry, for my first time in my career, I can say I can make my end user's experience better and significantly raise the security bar in an organization. And so that's why I get really excited about kind of the state of MFA, and like where I see it going in the very near future.
So, Jamie, in a previous life, I was a software designer. I built UI, UX. I now find myself sitting at the intersection between a career that is informed by delight and frictionless experiences. And if you're a designer, you've probably said some of those statements. And then on the security side, where often extra security means extra steps, extra friction, it means slowing down what the user wants to do. And it's exciting to me to think about how you bring together a great UX, a great user experience, while also increasing the amount of security, the amount of safety and trust that the end user would experience. And therefore, when you multiply it by everyone that's in your organization, that's a huge gain for security and for good experience. I want you to talk about how critical it is for identity solutions to integrate that seamless experience. What's the value to the organization, whether that's security, whether that's IT, whether that's the organization as a whole? Talk to me a little bit about the value of a seamless experience.
I would say there's so much value in the seamless experience from a perception, from an end user kind of experience. It actually can be. There's been some studies, and I'm not going to quote any of them directly, but there's been some studies that having a modern auth experience or low friction experience attracts better talent because people feel like they're working in a modern organization that cares about making sure that they're able to be effective and quick to get their job done. So I think it really does span the spectrum. But if I'm going to be very clear and very crisp on this, I think having the ability to have secure auth, leveraging the device that you're accessing resources from without having to leave the device, without having to go get a second device in any way, shape, or form, that alone is a productivity increase that is obvious. You can feel it every day. You don't even think, even if you have to auth to get into another application because it's a more risky auth, or you haven't authenticated for some time, if you simply have to touch your finger or look at a camera, you don't even think. You just do it. The speed bump that your security team put in place for security outcomes doesn't feel like a bump. It's almost like a carriage return. You just do it. And I think when that happens, your end users feel like security is not bothering them and they feel like they're able to do their best work. So I think that's a really exciting kind of feeling part of it. Now, when it comes to security, I'm going to make sure that it's very clear that when you have a passwordless experience where I cannot fish you into giving me credentials because the credentials don't exist, you literally have a secret key written into a trusted hardware module, a TPM, and that the only way to get access to that is to unlock it with biometrics means that like I can go down that crypto route and go down the security outcomes that I can offer. And I can't convince you to do a phishing website and click on this link if you can go do all of this and put this in place, which is pretty amazing. Again, the concept of a remote phishing attack can be essentially squished as long as you enforce this everywhere is an amazing outcome that only a few years ago, I would ask a security, like a CISO, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? And they would used to tell me all the time, phishing. And I would say, why? Like, why? I mean, we have all these great security controls. He goes, because if I get phished, all my security controls are gone. Nothing matters. That is it. Once I have that key, I walk in the front door and I don't even have any network or endpoint controls at that point.
So, Jamie, when you're talking about moving away from a password world to one that's using multifactor, and we're not quite there yet, to what I think you're talking about is like a passkey. There's a public portion of the key, there's a private portion of the key, there's the auth server that sits in the middle. That's the third part of the handshake. It means that if I go to fakebank.com, that looks like realbank.com, and they don't have the public portion. I never had a password to steal. The authentication never occurs. It doesn't matter if I click the link. And I can't believe I'm actually saying this on a security podcast, but here we are.
Right?
This is an incredible idea. And when I think about what end users have to agree to when they adopt something like this heavily relies on computer science to protect them rather than this password that I think is very random and hard to guess. What does it take to get an organization to implement?
So it's important to do this. So I'm going to do it, which is that there are two worlds that we need to talk about here. Because in one world, it is the consumer world, then the websites and the things that you referenced. You know, if you're using Gmail, even in your personal life, you might have seen that they're starting to introduce passkeys as an option. And in the consumer world, there is an evolution that's taking place on folks getting towards passkeys. Generally, passkeys offers you the ability to have phishing resistant auth. Phishing resistant auth is a term that's essentially coined by NIST in terms of what they mean by phishing resistant auth. And that means that you get all those properties that you just described. This is great for the world. This is great for our industry, for you and I, and my parents logging into things. And we have been leaning into that and really driving that. You know, where Okta is part of the FIDO Alliance, and we actually offer a different part of our product line. There's two major parts of Okta's product line. One is selling to the next SaaS company who's starting their new product and they want to have an identity journey. And we support passkeys natively as part of that platform. So if somebody wants to turn on passkeys for their app, they can just do it. The second part is workforce. And I just want to separate this out because both of these things matter. Now, what's really interesting is in the workforce land, when Okta is your IDP and your access management solution, essentially what you're doing is you're integrating Okta into all of the apps that are out there that you're using. This is your Workdays, your ServiceNows, your whatever your corporate apps are. You integrate Okta, and we can do whatever credentials you want. We can also offer you phishing resistant MFA out of the box natively. Now, what's great is because we are the one way that you log into all of your corporate apps, you get SSO. We had to build this one experience of seamless passwordless auth to Okta, and then an organization gets that across all apps like that. And so, because of that, it allowed us to drive the industry forward by saying, like, in reality, passkeys is great and it is evolving in an enterprise environment. It doesn't give you everything you want. It gives you phishing resistant auth, which is a huge step forward. But there's other things you want. I want to know more about that device. Is it a managed device? Is it a trusted device? Does it have a good posture? Is it integrated with my EDR solution or XDR solution? Does it have the right version that it's running? Can I get all of that in that same single auth? And the answer was yes, if you build towards that. And so Okta leaned in to build a purpose-built enterprise authenticator that gives you all of that with that same user experience of the one touch and passwordless auth. But it does more than just secure auth. So I'm only just kind of laying that out because having passkeys is huge for our world and getting away from knowledge factors, but leaning in towards biometrics as a way to give phishing resistant auth, plus all the other things we could do is something we actually call fast pass at Okta. But it's something that has been an amazing growth for all of our customers because it allows us to actually do more.
Jamie, I may have just had a small epiphany or a realization in real time. Is what you're talking about with passkeys consumer and what you're talking about with FastPass or what Okta solution does more along the lines of zero trust?
My short answer is yes, but it's more nuanced and the world is evolving. So I'll tell you this, like the concept of passkeys when it originally launched was very clearly, specifically for consumer use cases. In fact, Apple brought it to market first. It allowed you to switch over from a password to a passkey. It was backed up into your iCloud. All of that happened like overnight with Apple leaning in, which was phenomenal for the industry from a consumer perspective. On the enterprise side, we started to actually say, well, that's great, but it actually may not be perfect for some of the use cases we had in enterprise. Like,
Right.
I don't actually want my passkey backed up to your personal iCloud. I don't know, I actually want that. I want to be able to control that. And so people have really kind of given more constraints. That has led the industry to start to evolve even further so that now passkeys and hardware tokens and all of that is actually evolving as we speak so that there are more controls baked into the usage of this more secure auth flow.
Jamie, let's shift gears a little bit. What are the key strategies that organizations can use to unify and simplify their identity management systems?
It's really important for folks as they're looking at their overarching strategy. And I'll just break it down to a zero trust strategy. I mean, most organizations have gone through some type of zero trust journey, or they have a strategy, or they have a plan in place. And I think when you really look at that plan, I'll make some kind of bold statements. Like, I don't think you can get security right if you don't have identity right. It shouldn't be controversial to say that, but it is so important. And I think that when you look at the opportunities that are put in front of an organization to kind of think about an identity strategy, you really start to look at identity is not one thing. It's not just IDP anymore. Now you start to look at governance. You start to look at privilege access. You start to look at your security aspects or ITDR, which is identity threat detection and response. These are all different components on the zero trust strategy that, again, I think is underpinned and should really kind of start from an identity perspective out. And so it's actually kind of fun since I've been at Okta, and even if you just look at Okta in the last 5 years, we've evolved a lot to really lean in towards this concept of platform and platform from an identity perspective. And I think if you look at some of the other players that are out there, you're going to hear platform from lots of different folks. And what we mean is that there are some natural synergies for an organization to really think about. If I have an access management solution that can be uniformly deployed, can offer me that seamless user experience, it can work across all my modern SaaS apps as well as like reaching back and keeping my legacy apps secure and hybrid worlds as well. I can start to look at how I can leverage that in an access governance world where I might need to have off policies before I can give you access to a given app,
Yeah.
or tying those into a privilege access story. And so I think that's where we start to look at more of a platform type approach for a lot of folks looking at how identity can be a key component to their overarching strategy. And I counter that concept by saying, like, just because you hear the word platform, don't shut down, because a lot of people will say the word platform, and I think it's important for folks to say, think about platforms that have natural synergies. And I think that's where something where we wanted to lean in. We want to be your identity solution provider of choice, and I think that we're trying to stay within that lane and just excel within that world. And so that's something that we've been thinking a lot about, and not trying to just chase everything that's out there.
Jamie, what are the emerging trends or technologies you believe will have the biggest impact on the future of identity security?
I love this question because I think about this every day. um, and I'll give you some high level things that I think are really interesting. You mentioned passkeys earlier. We talked about that a bit. I do think it's really exciting. I think it's exciting to think about a world where, um, I mean, even on the consumer side, where my wife and I share credentials to log into our PG&E account. Like, what if that didn't have to happen anymore? Like, the technology is here for that. So I'm really excited about seeing this shift. If we look back at this podcast in 5 years, we're going to be laughing about the fact that I hope that like there was 100 websites that you called out. I think that's a great trend, and I think that there's going to be a lot of things going on there. That's good. I think the other thing that is happening more and more, and there's a ton of companies that have kind of entered this space called identity proofing. Many people may not even know that they've actually interacted with one of these tools already. But I'll give you an example of what this looks like in our everyday life. If you go to the airport and you've seen this thing called Clear, a lot of those solutions are actually trying to identify you as you. You provide your credentials. Well, what is that? It's my ID, it's my passport. And they're trying to give you like a digital version of that in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that. Um, Other folks might have seen it in you did your taxes. ID.me is another one of those players that are out there that are starting to drive this concept of identity proofing. Now, why is that so important from a security perspective? Adversaries are going to continue to evolve. Let's say, for argument's sake, we got this phishing resistant auth everywhere. Now they're secure auth. Well, what do? Well, you claim I lost my phone. You claim I lost my biometrics. They're gone. Whoa. Well, what do I do? Well, I call help desk. And I say, no, 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 no. Trust me, I'm David. He's not David. I'm David. And so the help desk teams are now the next thing under attack. And so, how can you raise the bar on a social engineering attack is another thing that folks are really spending some time on. And I think there's going to be a lot of evolution there. I think there's going to be some other things that are happening with that. So, once I do that and I've proved that I'm me, then this concept of wallets comes into play. And so, now we have these concepts of wallets, the digital wallet world, where I have a physical driver's license. Why can't I have a digital driver's license? Well, I
Sure.
do in California, which is cool, right? But no one accepts it yet. But so these are some of the cool things that I see the industry kind of like leaning into. The big players, the Apples, the Googles, the Microsofts are starting to lean in towards that as well. And I think that's going to help. raise the security bar, make things a bit more safe in the industry as well as even in the business world. We want to make sure that that help desk call, becomes, no big deal. No one's losing sleep on it. Whereas right now, that's a major concern for a lot of organizations.
We've talked about social engineering. We've talked about deep fakes. We've talked about the use of AI to drive social engineering, phishing, vishing, smishing on the pod in the past. I think all of those things are going to be driving where identity goes, forcing innovation, forcing adoption into this really important area of security around identity. What are some of the most important things that you want a listener of today's conversation to take away and remember?
That there are opportunities to raise the security bar with secure auth, and you can do it in a way where your end users actually like you. In a security podcast, if you don't hear that and go, what? I can make things more secure and make my users like me more. That should be ideally a tagline that everybody walks out of here and goes, wow, really? How does that work? And to hear that we've got some purpose-built baked solutions with Okta where you can have this passwordless experience. We've got integrations with some of the top security players out there as well, the Palo Alto networks of the world, a lot of the endpoint security vendors that are out there, making sure that you can have the most secure experience as well as the best user experience is my number one takeaway.
Jamie Fitzgerald, willing to cause you pain on the Peloton, but not on your login. Thanks for coming on Threat Vector today to talk about identity security, and some of the innovations Okta is working on, and generally educating me in a space through a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and keep in touch.
That's it for Threat Vector this week. I hope you found my conversation with Jamie as fascinating as I did. I've learned a lot about the evolving landscape of identity security and the critical role it plays in protecting organizations from today's threats. There are two key important takeaways from our conversation. First, identity is the new perimeter. In today's hybrid work environment where employees are accessing resources from anywhere, anytime, it's essential to have strong identity controls in place. This means moving beyond traditional passwords and implementing multifactor authentication, passwordless authentication, and other advanced security measures. Second, identity is the foundation of a zero-trust security strategy. By verifying every user, device, and application before granting access to resources, organizations can significantly reduce their risk of cyber attacks. A big thanks to Jamie Fitzgerald from Okta again for joining me on Threat Vector. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews and feedback really do help us understand what you want to hear. I want to thank our executive producer, Michael Heller, our content and production teams, which includes Kenny Miller, Joe Benencourt, and Virginia Tran. I edit Threat Vector, and Elliot Peltzman mixes our audio. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay secure, stay vigilant. Goodbye for now.